Hello folks, Mike Kaylee7 here again with another story from the files of my dad. So I'll tell you a little bit about the injuries that the man had to go through, and then about his philosophy as a dad. So as you may or may not know, he was a crane operator. I don't know why my camera just suddenly decided, I think it's dead. Anyway, I'll use the Sena. That's why I have the backup, right? So my father worked in cranes, and here are some of the injuries he suffered. He fell 50 feet. That's what they say, 50 feet. And that's the guys he worked with, too. Onto a pile of steel. And he broke his hip. This is back in the 60s. And he was in a body cast because it was a broken hip, you know. And he was so hot to trot that he actually cut the damn cast off him so he could have sex. And then he put it back on when he was done. He, in another incident, or maybe the same one as this falling onto the pile of steel, he somehow a crowbar, it was that same accident where he broke his hip. A crowbar went through his hand, right through the palm of his hand. Pulled it out, wrapped his hand in an oily rag, and walked himself down the block to the emergency room. They sewed up his hand, and then he got up to leave, and he fell on the floor because his hip was broken. They didn't know it. He walked all that way to the emergency room on a broken hip. Didn't even know it. Another time he was working on the boom of the crane or something, as a cable snapped and cut off half of his middle finger, a quarter of his ring finger, and the pinky on his the pinky on his left hand. You know, those three. So he picked him up with an oily rag. An oily rag apparently figured prominently in his life. And went to the emergency room, and they sewed his fingers back on. He used to show me off the scars, you know. He was in so many fights that all the knuckles on his hands were pushed back. He didn't really have any discernible knuckles anymore. There were all these bumps in the middle of his hand from all the fights he was in. He didn't have cauliflower ear, though, because people couldn't get to him. My mother used to watch him. He had a karate dojo that he made. And he would fling people around. He'd have 5 people attack him. And she said, you see bodies flying everywhere. Like the time he put 5 guys in the intensive care unit who were trying to mug him on the day I was born. He used to say to me every birthday, "Oh, your birthday." He was in a car accident up in Maine on a job once. He had a beautiful Pontiac. It was a Le Mans, I think it was, a 67 Le Mans. Beautiful black Pontiac. And this big truck apparently hit it. He had just filled the gas up and let out a passenger. Somebody was hitchhiking. And then he got hit by this truck in the snow, and it flattened the entire passenger side of the car, right down to the seat. And the driver's side was fine. He said if that passenger had still been in there, he'd be dead. And if my dad hadn't filled up the car with gas, the fumes would have blown the car up. On another job, he was driving truck, and he had all these barrels full of chemicals in them. And he had to unload them. And one of the barrels, as he was reaching for it or whatever, when it tipped, the chemicals fell into his eyes. So he had to go get his eyes washed out. Deadly chemicals in his eyes. He was on a tunnel job. This is the job, the Red Line Tunnel from Park Street up to Harvard Square and beyond. He was on that job. And so he was down in the tunnel, and he was on this machine. I don't know what kind it was, but he said he was on this machine. He told me the story to tell me the kind of people that he lived with every day and how he didn't want that life for me. So he's in the tunnel with what do they call them, the sand hogs or whatever? sand rats, the guys that work down there all the time. And they're in, knee deep in muck. And he said that this muck was human excrement, pee, poop, spit, chemicals, mud, dirt, broken pieces of machinery and stuff, all mixed up in this horrible muck. And he's being directed by this guy. The guy's like, go left, go right, and he's yelling because it's loud in the tunnel, And the guy's false teeth fell out as he's yelling these directions to my dad. What's he do? My dad said the guy picked up the false teeth. The dude put the false teeth back in his head, swished around a little bit with his tongue, and spit out the goo and kept yelling directions at my dad. And my dad said it was the most disgusting thing he had ever seen in his entire life. And that's the kind of people he worked with all the time. That's the kind of people he grew up with and worked with and lived with. Real hard scrabble, mean as a snake, kind of dirty, uncouth, whatever's. He did not want that life for me, which leads me to the philosophy that he had as a dad. He was alone a lot. His mom was in the hospital a lot. She had these tumors in her legs that she had to keep getting removed, and so he was alone a lot because his stepdad was working and he was drinking, and so he kind of just raised himself. And his older brother was away at the war, older sister was away. She had moved out. She was dancing up a storm in those USO clubs. So he kind of raised himself. Had nobody. And he didn't want that for his kids. He vowed that he would never do that to his children. So the first three he had, he was there for, because they were married still. First baby in 1958, my mom's pregnant, and he says, this is my Michael. This is my Michael. Nope. It was Susie. 4 years later, my mom gets pregnant again. He says, all right, this is my Michael. Here he comes. This is my Michael. Nope, Debbie. Third kid. All right now, this is 4 years later. This is my kid. This is my child. It was Laurie. And then 4 years later after that, he says, all right, I'm not going to have a son. I give up. So this one's going to be Elaine. It was me. And not long after my mom conceived me with him, they had a big blowout because he was cheating on her for many years. She was cheating on him, and so she kicked him out. And he went to go live with his girlfriend, and he told everyone in town that she had, black boyfriends. Back then, that was the big racist, horrible thing. Oh my God, mixed race. And she did. She had a very nice boyfriend named Irving. I met him years later as an adult. I didn't know him as a kid because I was too little. Very nice guy. He was terrified to see me because my dad slit his throat with a wine bottle, and nobody prosecuted because my dad was on the police force. So when Irving saw me all those years later, I looked just like my dad, and Irving's like, yeah, I gotta go. Don't blame him. Irving, if you ever see this, I don't blame you. Anyway, my mom had me, and there is no question about my lineage. If you see a picture of my father, it is literally a carbon copy, or I am, of him, and he is of his dad. So there's some stories about my dad. My dad was awesome to me. He raised me right. I had discipline and honor and duty and courage and love and happiness and jokes and laughing, and he became my best friend. I could not ask for a better dad. Right, this is Mike Haley 7. I'll talk to you later.